Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the No Sugar Podcast. I am Rob Loggia, here with Janice McAfee, and today joined by Anna Davis, the author of this delightful book. Let me hold it so you can see it correctly. There you go. The Open Source Enhancement Series, cyberpunk genre novel that I picked up a few years ago. And once I did, I could not put it down. I will say that an entire weekend of my life will forever be associated with this novel. This is a fact that I shared with Anna before she came on. And I took this upstate New York to a beautiful, just beautiful property up there. And really had a nice weekend surrounded by people that I care about. And read this whole book cover to cover in the spaces in between. So when everything's, people were preparing this or we're getting ready to leave there, I'd be reading a couple of pages or whatever. I couldn't put it down. So really, the author with us today has produced a wonderful plot and can write, and I know this isn't a high bar, so forgive me, but writes characters much better than Stephen King. But I would even say, even on par with some of William Gibson's characters. So welcome, Anna. Very nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I appreciate you reading it and liking it and saying all those great things. I guess my book Open Source came out in 2016, and it could be described as sci-fi horror with cyberpunk elements. And I'll explain why it's horror in a minute. But basically, it's set in a future Dallas in 2048, and a large percentage of the population has brain implants. Kind of like Neuralink, but in my fictional world, it's not Neuralink, obviously. And the main character is just kind of a regular guy. And when we meet him, he's homeless. He's a reporter, and he didn't want to play along with the technology game. And so he ended up losing his job and being evicted. And so when we first meet him, he's been homeless for about 3 months. And so the horror part of the writing is that there's two kinds of hacking of the brain implants. The first kind is like a cybersecurity hacking, like you would think of as regular hacking. The second kind is literal hacking, where people are chopping the brain implants out of each other's heads so they can get the data. And so in the very first chapter, the main character, Riker, he witnesses this neurochip theft. Like somebody dies and their head gets chopped open and he sees the whole thing. And so then he's kind of on the run after that. And a bunch of bad things happen. We'll get to that in a minute. But basically, the villain is learning how to program people's brain implants to change their behavior and their actions. And so Riker, our main character, gets wrapped into this terrible, terrible dilemma where he's got to figure out how to move forward in this world where he's ended up homeless.
Okay, it definitely sounds very horrific. I think just given where we're headed now, with Elon and his Neuralink, it seems that we're headed in that direction, and that definitely seems a bit scary, because it's human nature. We like to think of that human nature is, we are all loving and caring, and for the most part, we only want people to be happy and we want to do right by each other, but we completely forget the other side of ourselves, which is jealous and angry and bitter and racist and bigoted and seeking to assert our power, whatever power we may have over the weak, and that is just completely human nature. So I can totally see the aspect of your book, speaking about that hacking in both ways. Happening with that situation. I wonder what do you think about moving forward towards that, where we're moving in a direction where it seems like we're going to have technology somehow kind of inserted within our bodies, whether it's to display our banking information or medical information. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's proceeding at a very rapid pace. And I think COVID kind of brought a lot of that telehealth and digital health to the forefront. It was already being developed, but when COVID happened, everyone just jumped on board with maybe contact tracing and different things like that. And so it's not, when I started writing this book back in the early 2010s, I guess, somebody asked me that they read a draft of my novel, and then they asked me what would happen in the world to make people start to adopt this technology. It seems kind of far reached that people would do this. And now, 10 years later, it doesn't seem far reached at all. It's starting to happen. One thing I said in a TikTok video is that it's kind of like if, with the brain implants, it's kind of like if Elon Musk's Neuralink got hijacked by the mafia. Because it's kind of my feeling that the criminal world, like the real criminal world with violence, is going to merge eventually with the cyber criminal world. And I think it is scary. My kids are 18 and 20. And so I went through their teenage years during the writing of this book. And, just try to keep teens off Instagram. You just can't. It's trying to keep our family locked down, privacy-wise, was very difficult. And I even went for a time when I got rid of my smartphone. And I got one of those little flip phones where the tiny buttons and I couldn't do much of anything. I couldn't access the web on it. I couldn't, just do basic communication with people's emails and things like that. And it was really eye-opening that if I didn't have that technology, then I would fall behind. And that's kind of a little bit my own personal path that kind of coincided with my main character's path a little bit.
Well, that was something that I thought you did very well. And certainly the subject has been explored before, but the idea of something now even voluntary. Okay, so part of what made the plot believable was that you could see it happening. In other words, you describe a world. The world is in the not too distant future, but we're here now. And then I sit down as a reader and I can see how we got from here to there. And that's not a given. A lot of stories that are otherwise good stories do fall flat there, where they just expect you to accept that this is where we ended up. But what you're showing is that, it became almost a driver of class and the new class system.
Yes.
And in fact, that a lot of the uptake was voluntary in that you could call it that. And then what happens is that over time, voluntary becomes, well, if you don't want to be left behind, then you have to do this. As I was talking to Janice earlier, and one of the things we were saying is for the very reasons that we keep steroids out of sports, because if you allow one person to take a performance-enhancing drug, it becomes a pressure now, and it's no longer voluntary that the others take it. They either take it or they don't compete. So we say, no, that's just not something we're going to do. We face similar problems here, and that's part of what you went over. And I can see now that that part of that is from your history. So you're already looking at these issues. And one of the things that struck me is that how quickly after I read this, a lot of these things came to the fore. And that is with COVID. We've seen a lot of what is discussed here, this whole second class of people. We've kind of already, forget about heading there. We've kind of already reached the shores with that, where there is this second class of people medically behind, who are not able to participate in society in the same way.
Yes. And I think a lot of that too, I was, when I was drafting this book, I was volunteering at a homeless shelter, and it was it was kind of like a residency homeless shelter where you have to get approved to get in and pass a background check. And because there were families that stayed there, so they couldn't just let anybody in. And then it was kind of a program where people would stay until they got back on their feet again. And so I volunteered there for several years. And that was back when we had a computer lab where people would come in and check their emails and apply for jobs in the computer lab. But now even the homeless have these cell phones, or smartphones, I guess. And that's how they do everything. So they might not be able to afford a house, but they've got to pay their smartphone bills and their internet bills so that they can do all the basic things like email people and apply for jobs. And so it was during that time that I really started to think through what would happen if the homeless community couldn't get access to the technology that they need. And I mean, they just fall behind so fast. And then you take it the next level to brain implants, and you go apply for a job, and a percentage of the applicants have the brain implants, and they're super smart and basically flawless. And so that it'd be very difficult to compete with that.
Yeah, wow. It is, to your point, Rob, we are definitely, we have arrived at this juncture where I do feel like it's going to start being pushed more, this merging of technology into our bodies. I think John and I, he was doing a talk once in London, I think maybe about 2014, 2015, and we met some people there who actually had chips already implanted in their hands, and you would put your phone in their hand and it would immediately bring up their LinkedIn profile. And so, they were, super excited about the technology, and the only thing I could think about is, what if that gets hacked? And then what happens then? And the one lady, she had hers initially where it was implanted. It had somehow shifted about 30 degrees south of where it should have been. So it's just, it's just interesting and scary just to, and invasive, it's extremely invasive. And I fear that, yes, it will begin voluntarily. And much like, people voluntarily locked down for COVID, right? Because they thought they were doing something for the greater good. We don't want to be grandma killers. We want to make sure we're not a super spreader. And that fear that initially was just stoked up, and then how quickly it turned, against the people that said, I think this is ridiculous, or I should have a choice here. I shouldn't have to get this vaccine, and I want to be able to choose what happens to my body. But you had people harassing them, violently harassing them sometimes, people violently being arrested by the police, and just because they wanted to have autonomy over their own bodies. And I fear that eventually that may come to pass with the technology, because that's just our nature. We can look back in history and see what we have done throughout history and how it will play out. And that's kind of my fear about this.
Well, history has told us how it will play out. And that's what Anna describes essentially throughout this work. And it becomes a class system. You necessarily have to have an underclass at that point. And to use your example from earlier, Anna, you discussed going without a modern smartphone. You compare your experience to the experience of the homeless that you saw, who did now have those devices. They had to have those. It was a lifeline. In this new class hierarchy, would have placed you beneath them in terms of opportunities available to you, et cetera, et cetera. Let's say instead of a phone, we were talking about this biometric chip that you either had or you did not have. Somebody with no prospects under this system that we have now would have more prospects than you. And in fact, one of the characters, don't quiz me, but it was the relative. She used her house kind of like a safe house or whatever, but she had a normal life, and we got a window into that normal life. And you saw, she just wanted what she wanted, and that was the price. And I think to myself, is there anything more tragic than that? I think about my daughter, and I think about her being put in that situation. Forget about myself. That ship sailed. There's really nothing they could offer me. But she has a whole life ahead of her. Is that really a fair decision to ask her to make? And then if you fast forward from that, what then do we say to somebody like Elon Musk, who's pushing these technologies ahead, to ensure that he's considering the moral implications of doing so, the effects that this could have? I'm not sure it's being discussed enough.
I don't think it is either. I think, anytime something comes up on Twitter or Facebook or something, and people are like, oh, let's do these brain implants. Let's do implantable chips. Let's all become cyborgs. I'm like, well, is it hackable? Can it be hacked? And if it can, that's a big problem, because, our phones can be hacked, and nobody wants that. And so imagine something with the power of our phone inside our head. That's just, So I went through, and I'll just get to this real fast, and then we can go into other topics, but I went through some intense paranoia when I was writing this book. And it actually, when I was writing it, it wasn't quite that bad, because I was escaping into my fiction. So it was an outlet for me. And I was writing my fears now. And then I'd come home and make dinner for the family or pick up the kids or, but we'd go, to school programs and stuff like that. So I was essentially living this regular life, raising kids in this time that we're all in. And I was just directing all of my dark thoughts and my paranoia and my, negative feelings into the book.
For me to soak up.
I'm sorry?
For me to soak up.
Yes, I guess so. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I was just basically doing a normal thing on the outside, and on the inside, I was just processing all this stuff. Well, when the book came out in 2016, people would come up to me and they would be like, "This is really happening. This is real stuff." And I was like, I wanted to put my hands over my ears and scream like la 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 la, because I would rather it be fiction than for it to be real. Because as a writer, I have to think of the worst case scenario. And I have to put my characters in bad situations and then make them 10 times worse. And so, now that we're in this spot where there are being brain implants, not just Elon Musk, but I think there's a competitive company called Synchron that just started their trials in humans for for helping people who are paralyzed to verbalize their thoughts. And, just my own path with the paranoia that I faced and my own mental health struggles, I can see why somebody would come to me and they'd be like, "Oh, we have this brain implant and it can cure what you have, and you won't have to take meds, or you won't have to do this, or you won't have to do that. And it'll just cure it. And it's safe. Yeah, it's safe. Why don't you get this?" I'm like, it's not safe. I don't think I would want that in my head.
Yeah. And it becomes a real question, too, when you start hitting into that territory. I don't think anybody is going to say, that helping a disabled person gain fuller expression is somehow a bad goal. Right. So it's almost as if it was something that we could dismiss out of hand. It would be easier if we could just say, "God, no, that's evil. I'm not going anywhere near that." We hear something like that and we say, "Well, that doesn't sound so bad. That actually seems like a very nice thing to do for somebody." But then the next step becomes, well, I can enhance. I mean, we know these things don't stop. And then, you dovetail off of that to are people like us just sort of shouting into this storm, which is inevitable, and which will eventually overtake us. No different than if you were on the beach shouting at the waves. Eventually they're going to pull you out. I don't know that there isn't, because the problem is once the cat's out of the bag, as you said, now there's a competitor. And once these things sort of become known how to do, any exclusivity that any particular vendor has is going to go away. And more concerning, that's when, big cyberpunk topic, but that's when you start seeing these things make their way into the underworld. And now the underworld can easily just buy from somebody, because that's what they have plenty of, is money. They don't need the top scientists. They'll go buy from somebody how they can do these things, and we know what they use it for. And then this is the world we're heading for. I mean, how do we prepare for that? I can understand why maybe you're a little paranoid and anxious, because when you stop and sit and think, it's troublesome.
It is. And I have to say, I went, and you and I talked about this a little bit over messaging, but I went into a really dark place in my own life after open source came out, and I had to confront the reality that this is the road that we're heading down. And it's not just fiction, and I can't just escape. It's actually going to happen, maybe. It looks like it will. And I think I had a lot of things helping me get through that time without going into the total void of darkness, that it felt like would happen to me. And I think art and creativity were instrumental in helping me. I went through extreme paranoia. I was suspicious of all of the people around me. I was suspicious of digital communication. And I was even suspicious of God, and I didn't trust him anymore. So it was my faith and my friends and my family, and all of that got shaken just terribly. And I didn't trust it all. I thought it was all spying on me and out to get me. It was a dark, dark time. And so even when my faith wasn't helping me like it normally would, I think it was art and creativity of all kinds. Like I would just whatever helped at the time, I would just do that. So if it was watching movie trailers on YouTube, or or some of those like fan-made clips from movies. I think I had an Avengers fan-made clip that I watched over and over just because I liked the music and I liked the action and it made me feel better. And there's so much music. I started paying for a Spotify account for premium, so I could just have my music whenever I wanted to, and I could pick what I wanted without commercials. And I'm not advertising Spotify, I promise. But just different things like that helped me so much to not sink down into this pit that it felt like I was sinking in from accepting the reality of what's happening.
Wow. Okay, so I have to share with you, okay, about the movie trailers. So that really became a part of my safe space, dealing, since Sean died. I would just binge on, Netflix, but YouTube. I don't know what happened. YouTube just became my home for my safe space, and I would watch all sorts of trailers and all sorts of movies, and so I can definitely relate to that. Trying to just grasp at anything that will keep you from falling into the abyss of whatever that darkness is at the time. It's very easy to do that, and art and music is very influential in helping to thwart that. So I thank you for sharing that. But it's such a great tool to kind of help, when, like you said, when your faith is shaken or you don't trust your friends, or, I can definitely even relate to that. I didn't trust anyone in my environment. Mind you, I'm in a country where I don't speak the language. I'm learning, but this is not my home. I'm not around friends. I'm not around, friendly faces necessarily. So it's, I definitely relate to that, and just finding that something, that you can reach for that will help to pull you back. Because me personally, I don't feel that necessarily drugs are the way to help with that. And I'm meaning, what maybe the psychiatrist would subscribe, and I'm not downing anyone that has needed that, and because I'm sure it has helped a lot of people. But for me, given the situation I was in, and obviously if there is a hint of paranoia there, you obviously probably don't want to think about trusting someone to give you a drug that you don't know this person.
Yes.
And they may seem that they have good intentions, but what if they don't? And so yeah, I can definitely relate to your struggle, or how you were able to get through that.
I was kind of curious for each of you, because I know it's been a terrible couple years and for you guys, especially since John's passing. So you think, Janice, you kind of answered it, but how have you stayed afloat? That's been one of the hardest things for me with my different struggles, and art has been instrumental. But I was just wondering if you guys had any tips for when we encounter those dark times.
Stubbornness helps. I keep my head above water and my sanity in the same way. I don't know if you remember the movie, what was it, Creep Show? There's a couple of different scenarios. One of them, they had Leslie Nielsen was the bad guy, and he buried Ted Danson up to his neck on the beach, and then Ted Danson came back as a swamp monster and grabbed him and did the same thing to him. And right before the wave came in, he yelled out, his last line of the thing was, "I can hold my breath for a long time." And that is the only thing that sustains me. I think everybody here, and one of the hard things I know for Janice in her situation is that family is a big one for her. It is for me as well. And she does not have ready and easy access to her family, removing that avenue. And I feel for that more than anything else, because aside from my little joke there, the real answer is the important things are what sustain us. I mean, there's really, the creative process can help. We're discussing your book, and you've mentioned it now in two contexts as almost similar to the space of Yoda's cave, where you had Yoda's cave and all the light that Yoda brought with it, and so you mentioned the therapeutic effect of the of the work, but then next to that is the dark cave, and that's all the shit that's attached to it. That makes it hard, and I can relate to that as somebody that has an on and off author himself. I have a very adversarial relationship with the keyboard, and perhaps if I was analyzed, they would find that there was some sort of interface issue. When I was very young, I wrote a great deal and maybe burned myself out to some extent. But what I find as time goes on is that while it's very clear up here what I want to say, getting it here is very difficult on the keys, and to the detriment of one typewriter that I had, which didn't survive the interaction. So, and it had nothing really, if I'm being honest, to do with the typewriter. So that was unfortunate. It was a good typewriter. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's this duality to it, and I guess that makes it very human for me. But I am going somewhere, just taking a long way around the barn. What, my elbow to my knees? Is that what? Would you ever consider writing more? Or is that in the cards? Is it something we can look forward to? Maybe not the same subject, maybe not the same series, but I mean, it's a dark place, and yet you seem to feel that it did you some good. So that's my 18-minute question.
Well, yeah. So there is a sequel. This one was called, the one that you have is called Open Source. Okay. And the sequel is going to be Inside Source. And I actually wrote the whole draft to that in 2017, 2018, when I was in my super dark place. And so the plot got worked out, the character arcs got worked out. But what I have found since then is it was so dark, I didn't like it. And the thought of revising it and editing it, it just kept bringing me to this dark place over and over. And I finally put it aside, and I was like, I'm not going to think about this right now. And so I picked it up again recently, and I had some epiphanies about, it's dark because it's dark material, but I had epiphanies about how to make it fun writing again. And so it's just the creative process. And honestly, like you were saying, you have to make yourself to sit at the keyboard. And sometimes it's not always fun, but once I finally made myself focus and sat down, I was like, okay, yeah, I can make this fun again. This can be a fun story again. So I'm working on it. So should be, yeah.
That's nice. I'm excited to see that. So I want to just, how I guess maybe what I want to ask is, how do you feel that your writing has helped you really to kind of, or was it just your writing still that helped you to kind of come out of that darkness, or was it also I guess what I wanted to say is how were you able to come back to the writing or the second book? What changed in your life or your perspective?
Time, for one thing. I gave it time. And I got real down on myself because I wasn't writing a lot. And then that made the darkness worse. And I know I keep referring to the darkness, but it's, I think we all know what a dark place feels like. And so there was a while in there that writing didn't help me, and not writing fiction. And so I started journaling, but I was paranoid at the time. So I filled up several legal pads of journal entries, but I would shred them immediately. So I was writing just for me, and I was getting stuff out, and that creative process helped so much. Helped me to heal and recover. And in the middle of that time, I was also watching YouTube videos and listening to music and reading books. I was reading so many books, just of different kinds, and all of that together, plus my family and my friends, of course. I mean, that's especially my kids and my husband. They really they went through a lot with me. So I'm grateful that they're still here and coming through it with me.
It may be apocryphal, but the American Indians used to do a similar thing to what you described. They would take some bundle of darkness and bring it to the river, send it down the river. Their bad thoughts, all of their, whatever it was. And it was one way to dispatch an enemy. Another way to dispatch him Well, no, we won't go there. So what we do here, kind of on the show, one of our big sort of, I guess, differentiators, if you want to call it that, we're very much about people starting something and finishing it, which is what you've done. The proof is here. Nothing more needs to be said. But one of the things that we want to do is sort of bring this to others that might be considering it or have doubted themselves or don't even know where to begin. So you've seen the publishing of a book from writing it to completion to publishing to promoting it. And I guess what I would ask you is, what could you say that maybe would help you if we went back to the beginning and you could hear these things, would have helped you maybe succeed faster or more to your liking that maybe somebody else won't have to find out now?
I think the biggest thing is don't feel like you have to start at the beginning and take it all the way to the end. At the beginning of a creative process like this, you might get all kinds of outline ideas, and you might just be like, oh yeah, this is how it starts, and this is how the middle is, and this is how it ends, and I'm just going to sit down and write it. But for me and a lot of people, it doesn't come that easily, and so I would say just start where it feels comfortable starting. When I was drafting Open Source, I'd start with a feeling, and then maybe it was about the main character, or maybe it was about a side character, or maybe it was about the villain. And I just open up a Word document and just write my feelings or my thoughts about that. And it wasn't beginning, middle, or end. It was just kind of thought development. And I'd highly recommend just starting where you're at. And it doesn't even, you can shred it if you want to. Like, it doesn't even have to go anywhere. But if it gets your mind to that next step, and then the next step and the next step, just one little step at a time is really helpful.
Interesting. I have to ask, any Riker, any inspiration from Star Trek at all?
No, actually no.
I was on it spelled completely differently, but I hear the name and it's the sci-fi context. I had to ask the question. Really, a phenomenal book, an excellent read, and from what we've heard today, not easy to produce.
Right.
So if anything, I think that's one of the messages that people can take away from this. Sometimes the best things and the things that may bring value to other people's lives are not something that is easy necessarily for us to do, and may even take a toll. But at the end of the day, 1 to 10, I mean, however you want to put it, worth it?
Oh, yes, it's definitely worth it. 10.
Oh, that's awesome. What else? I don't know. I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I like speaking to people who, I guess, have done things that I would aspire to do. I would love to write a book about, just my life and my life before John and with him, obviously, because that's what everyone is interested in. So I'm happy that you're sharing kind of your experiences and what writing has been to you, and how it's been sort of therapeutic in ways to help you kind of process your thoughts or whatever you're dealing with in your life at the time. So I'm really excited to see your second book. I will admit, I think I told you this already before, but I haven't read your Open Source, but I am looking forward to reading it. I've just purchased it, so I'm looking forward to reading it and reading your sequel as well. I'm excited about that. And I just wonder, what's next for you, I guess? Are there going to be any more books, or will you, I don't know, will you be journaling more that will become something else? Or
I have the same question myself. I'm kind of at a transitional stage in my life. My daughter's at college and my son is a senior in high school. So I'm finding myself with extra time. And right now, when I look this way and look that way, I'm in my office and I've got whiteboards, dry erase boards, and bulletin boards, and all these little notes that I've made. Sometimes I'm more comfortable just writing on a dry erase board, and then if I like what I see there, then I'll take a picture of it, and then I'll erase it and write something else. And So yeah, I'm definitely hoping to release Inside Source in the coming year,
Awesome.
at least. And but yeah, that's where I'm at.
That was the other thing. Just for my personal information, new set of characters, completely like picking up a different. I'm not asking for spoilers. I'm just
For Inside Source.
yes.
Yes. So I changed. Well, I don't know what I can say without saying too much. I changed points of view. So it's from a different point of view.
Okay.
And it's 5 years later after the end of Open Source. So I changed the timeline a little bit. And then I'm changing the city up some. So Open Source all takes place in Dallas in 2048. And so I'm going up to 2053, and it's going to be in a different Texas city. And I'm actually playing with having a fictional city in Texas. But part of my writing block was that I was trying to extrapolate real world Dallas into Inside Source. And it just got, the research in that is insane. And so I'm going to feel a lot better with this fictional city that I've created, where I can do a lot more than I'd be confined to with just Dallas. So yeah, there's a lot that's different in Inside Source, but I'm hoping I can pull it off and that the story's good.
Well, listen, I'm certain that you'll finish it. When you do, you are certainly welcome, and we hope you'll come back on here to talk about it.
Thank you. I would love
and then
to.
now with those two, that should be enough material for Netflix to get in touch with you. This would make an excellent series. I say that more than half joking. One of the other things you did well was create a visual sort of mise-en-scene where you can grab a hold of something and associate it with these issues that we've discussed today. I'm going to do my best. I make no promises, but I hope that we're sitting here amongst some of the features from that book. So we will see how well and far I get with that. But my point is that there's a lot that can be gleaned from simply cues like that. I mentioned to you in some of our communications a smell. A smell can trigger an entire other, series of emotions or whatever. For Netflix, for video, it's, striking visual elements, I guess is what I'm trying to, again, taking the long way. It must be something in the air today. But it's striking visual elements that really make for a great series as opposed to not so great. Because let's face it, plots have been done, and they visually presenting a plot. I don't care what was in the book. They're already backed in certain corners, and there's only certain things they can do. So what's left is what can they visually present to people. You had the quarry and very distinct sections of the book that each carried their visual elements. So if somebody's smart over there, they'll get a hold of that, and then my agent's fee is 15%. So, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
Janice,
you for having me.
did you cover all the ground that you wanted? I think you said that you did. But
So.
Yes.
okay, wonderful. Then, people, hope to see you next time on the No Sugar podcast. Janice, take it away.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Anna, it was a pleasure talking to you. Rob, as always, and peace out.
There it is.
Thank you.